Therefore, in theory, people will want long-term. There'll be a shortage of long-term debt, so therefore they'll lend more back to the mortgage market. Again, that shows the problem of this myopic view of the world. China said, well, gee, thank you very much, and they shortened their maturity by selling their 30-year bonds and moving, down to 2-year notes or less. So the problem we have is that there's no way to stimulate the economy, because if they pump in the cash, there's no guarantee it just stays here, be exported overnight. We don't know who owns what. The only thing we do know is that 40% of the interest on our national debt goes out to foreigners. So the old economic theories were a fixed exchange rate system and all these things after World War II, but it just doesn't exist anymore. And we really have to sit down and revise the entire world monetary system because nobody knows what they're doing.
I want to go to the euro for a moment, and I want to have you comment on, I think it surprised a lot of people, the movement in the euro markets with their problem. People don't understand how capital is mobile today, and it can move. So as European problems accelerated, money moved out of the euro, capital flowed into the United States, strengthening the dollar because we had a lot of dollar bearers at the beginning of the year. And in that process, not only did it strengthen the dollar, but it brought down interest rates. Now, a lot of people would credit that most of this came as a result of Fed policy, but isn't it more a movement of global capital, Martin?
Yeah, exactly. The same precise thing happened in 1931. Most people don't realize because it's another one of the things they tended to leave out of the history books. But virtually all of Europe defaulted on its national debts in 1931. Britain went into a moratorium. They eventually came back and honored it. South America defaulted. China defaulted. You can go to an antique dealer and you'll find a lot of these bonds. They're very pretty, and they sell them very nicely framed up for people. But as that happened, the capital came here, and that's what pushed the dollar up to all-time record highs during the Depression. Now, politicians didn't understand what they were doing then either, and that's when they came out with Smoot-Hawley and said, oh, this is protectionism, and they were trying to force the dollar down back then as well. Eventually, FDR did devalue the dollar and in 1934, and that kind of got things going a little bit after that. But what we were seeing in Europe and what the Europeans didn't do properly, they thought they were creating a single currency. What they didn't do was they didn't create a single debt. So they left the national debts in each of the members. And what they did at that point in time is really they left, by doing that, you're creating a derivative. That, okay, fine, the Deutschmark doesn't exist anymore, or the Greek drachma, but if I short the Greek bond, it's effectively the same thing as if it were the currency. I can isolate just Greece and sell that. Now, what happens is that pressure has been pulling Europe apart, and they're not prepared to consolidate the debt to stop it, and they keep putting Band-Aids on to try and prevent it. But it's not going to happen. I mean, Europe is collapsing under this monetary idea that they had, and the way I can explain it in American terms, I mean, if you can imagine what chaos we would have if all 50 states were allowed to issue federal government debt. I mean, it would be an absolute free-for-all. And unfortunately, in Europe, there is no single European bond. Every country issues its own, and then the banks use those independent states. They take their debt and they use that for the reserves to say that the banking system is secure. Now, when you start taking Greece down and people start attacking the bonds of Spain and Italy and so on, what happens is now you're attacking the actual reserves of the bank. So now we have a banking crisis develop. So, I mean, Europe is just, the politicians won't do the right thing. And therefore, it's just turning into a real basket case.
Martin, does the euro survive? In other words, let's say they're forced through a financial crisis to create some kind of political union, because right now, as you pointed out, they have a monetary union without the political union to go along with it. So you have this disparate policies of countries issuing different bonds. Can they survive, or does this whole thing fall apart?
I seriously doubt under the current conditions that they would survive. And that is going to cause a lot of economic turmoil, and that kind of brings us back to where the domestic analysts here will get it wrong again, because as that capital comes fleeing from the craziness in Europe, that will only push the dollar up even higher. And right now you have Japan is also an economic basket case. The yen is going up to record highs, because right now people are pulling money back to Japan because they need it so desperately. But once that's over, then it will flip, and the capital will start coming back out again, and that will then drive also the dollar back up. And then our politicians here will get mad about, the implications on trade, etc. Our trade deficit will get worse, unemployment will rise, they'll blame it on that, and then we'll be back to the same old stuff that we were in the 30s. But Europe has to, there's no real domestic confidence to support a political union. And everybody's blaming everybody else at this point, and probably the majority of the opinion in Europe against any kind of a political union. And you're seeing the massive amount of people protesting. I mean, they look like there were absolutely like 10,000 people out there in Spain about this Occupy Wall Street. We're getting the youth in a lot of these countries, particularly in Southern Europe. Unemployment rates are like 30%, in some cases up to 50%. I mean, you're looking at major political disruptions here, and where we go doesn't look too good as long as the politicians refuse to sit down and actually look at what's happening. But they're all just trying to hold on to their power.
Now, when we go back and translate that here, as the dollar moves up, as it's doing now, meaning that it's going to make our exports more expensive, and then you have politicians here calling for currency manipulation by other countries, not realizing the global economics. Yet, Martin, we have here in the U.S. more calls for more regulation, more taxation, more government intervention. It's amazing to see this transpire. It's like nobody has ever gone through and read a history of what we did in the Great Depression that turned a recession into a depression. About the only thing it seems like Mr. Bernanke learned from that was to print more money. But in a global economy, when he prints money, it comes back and boomerangs here.
Yeah, I mean, we're still living under a lot of the old Marxist agenda in many ways. And it sounds nice. I mean, you see these people saying we're the 99%. But what they really don't understand is that if you confiscate all the assets of the top 1%, what are you going to accomplish? Will it do anything? It won't even balance the budget. I mean, that's not our real problem. I mean, you can keep raising the taxes all you want, but we have deficits far beyond that. And we're not going to solve the problem that way. We really have to do a serious reform. And if you take, for example, what the Tea Party has been saying. It sounds nice, balanced budget, okay. But we have debt that is continuing to increase. And so what will happen is that the cost of interest to keep carrying this debt that we never pay off is going to continue to escalate. Eventually that would reach 100% of total expenditure. So you can have a balanced budget and the debt crowds out everything else from Medicare, all the way to unemployment benefits. There won't be any of that. So a balanced budget, we're beyond that too. We really have to do a serious monetary and economic reform here. And the government has been doing this since World War II. They borrow year after year after year, and there's just never any intention of paying anything back. If you go to a bookstore, you can go look for basically the World Almanac, little paperback type thing. And in the beginning, look there, they have tables, all the data on the national debt. And year after year, they'll list how much you paid in interest. If you add up the interest expenditure between 1986 and 2006, you'll see about 80% of the increase in the national debt was all interest. So we're not getting anything for this. 40% of that money is going out of the country. So it's just astonishing to me that you can cut every program you want, but the national debt is off the table. You can't negotiate it. You can't. I mean, we have to create a new monetary system. We just have to do so. I mean, the debt is going to take over absolutely everything to the point we won't have any kind of expenditures for anything. I had called the doctor for my mother, and they said they're no longer taking Medicare patients because they're anticipating cuts coming through in January. So you can have these nice programs, but they keep chopping away at them because of the rise in the national debt cost. You know, they can say, oh, well, we're going to tax the rich. Okay, fine, go ahead. Take everything they have. Still won't stop the continual growth in the national debt. I mean, it's like the pink bunny that is on the Energizer, commercial. It's just going to keep on going. So unless we sit down and start really seriously saying, look, we have to revise everything and let's look at this, there's not much that we really have to look forward to other than sheer economic chaos.
Is it going to take a crisis, Martin, as we saw take place in the 30s, which unfortunately led to World War,